account the extent to which prejudice is deeply rooted in our brains, we have a better chance of coming up with long-term solutions that work with rather than against our natural tendencies. The other important theme is that antipathy towards members of other groups gains much of its traction through fear. This was coming from there were some articles on neuroscience of racism that I was reading. They were kind of high quality journalism that was reporting on science. And these, so they've done a lot of studies on the brain and what's going on with bias and antipathy towards other members of other groups. And the conclusion of many of these studies is that it has a lot to do with fear, particularly of males. I thought that was very interesting. The snap judgments people make about others may be part of a sensitive alarm system that evolved when the people most likely to present a violent threat were strange males. And part of what I was understanding from these things I was reading was that, this basic perspective that humans, one of the main reasons they've been so successful as a species is because their ability to gather together into more complex groups than any other species on the planet. So many of you know this, that most mammals don't know who their father is. And it's very rare for mammal groups to have grandparents caring for the offspring. There's like a few different monkey species where that happens, or males caring for the offspring. So we're very unique in the complexity of our social groups, and that the power of that my group force in us is evolutionarily ancient. And what comes with that my group, this cut from the same cloth or turn the other side of the coin, is the ability to distinguish my group from other. And so I think this article, this quote, is so interesting in terms of seeing just how deep the suspicion of males in particular from the other group runs in us. And the writer went on to say another interesting thing. The writer was talking about how the science that I'm sharing with you right now has been reported. And he was talking about this other story, in the quote that comes here, the story ignores a whole section of the scientific review. He's referring to another story that was written about this science. And he said that the story kind of played up how bad things are. And the writer thought that was a disservice to the science, because the review included information about the malleability of the circuitry of race. That over the last century, researchers studying race have found a dramatic drop in racist attitudes and stereotypes. And that there is strong neuroscience evidence for what we have long known, that becoming familiar with individuals from other races, as well as a conscious desire to transcend our prejudice, can erode racism and other forms of bigotry. And the point that this writer was making is that there's a lot of scientific evidence that the human is becoming better and better at this over many, many centuries. And that fits with something I read in Steven Pinker, that a scientist has done a careful study, trying to think, like, how would you really figure out whether racism is going up or down in America, say since the 70s? So this scientist came up with an ingenious idea, because you can't just go up to people, are you less racist than you used to be? That's not science. He studied Google searches, which exploded at one point, right, in our history. And he did a very complex analysis of lots of Google searches, because their Google searches are saved. You can see what people were searching for in Google. That data exists. So he looked at a huge number of Google searches in the US and compared identifying racist language in the searches, and then compared the searches over different time periods. And the report was that a very substantial drop in racist language in Google searches is the steady pattern. So I think it can be dicey to say things are getting better, and maybe we'll talk about that a little more after the breakout section that's coming up here in a moment, when I say a little more about some of Steven Pinker's knowledge, because people often associate that with a certain political group. I've noticed this. I've been really struck by how people push back hard on me when I talk about how things are getting better. But Pinker argues, if things really are getting better factually, and we don't know why, then we're really handicapped in making it go even further. And I find that highly resonant with the Bowen community and the Bowen theory view, that when you want to try to help a system change, you relate to the strengths in the system. So this is something I've really made a long-term practice of, and one of the most big, the strongest things I have an impulse to do is try to understand people who think differently than me politically. So if I encounter a Trump voter in the South when I'm working down there with a business, I feel excited because I want to find out about the strengths in that person. And likewise, I think this idea that things could be getting better, many people would disagree. In fact, I'd like to have a debate with somebody in the Bowen network who thinks we're in a deep societal regression. I think it'd be fun to have someone on this meeting and have a really civil discourse with someone who deeply believes that we're in a societal regression. I'll take the other side, and maybe we could learn something from each other. The way I read the facts, I do not think we are in a societal regression. I think we're in a long-term societal progression, and it seems like it's possible that that includes racism as well. Okay. All right, so those are my remarks. Now, those of you who are familiar with these calls know that we do this breakout process, which I'm going to initiate now. And Zoom will automatically put you into groups of 3 or so. And if you don't want to speak, obviously you don't need to. You actually have the power to leave the breakout room if you want to. Here are some suggestions that I have for how you function in these breakout rooms. It's going to be 10 minutes and there'll be a timer, and you should have a countdown letting you know it's about to end. Skip the introductions. I just think it's not about really getting to know each other. It's a chance to integrate your own thinking about Bowen theory and racism. So if you just jump right in and someone starts on and tries to do the second bullet there, say what you really think. I invite you to experiment with saying what you really think in this breakout. And then when your time's done, take 2-3 minutes. Maybe watch out for yourself. Make sure you don't go over 3 minutes. Listen to what they really think. And practice curiosity and skip the debate. All right, I'm going to send you into those breakout rooms now. It'll take a minute. And then you'll come back and we'll have some time to interact.
Hello, anybody home? Anybody in the group?
Yes.
Our meeting isn't so large today. Maybe we can pull this off. Maybe picture with me that we're in a conference room like we were used to doing this winter. And we're sort of able to look around and read who would like to say something. And I'm going to do that now. And you have 2 different ways you can interact with me. One is via chat. So I'm thinking if you have something, an insight you'd like to share towards a Bowen theory of systemic racism, or something you thought was absolutely fascinating about Walter, what Walter said, or something that was wrong about what I said, one option you have is to chat. And I'll just read what people wrote. And I have many friends and colleagues, a lot of really good systems thinkers on this call. So another possibility is to wave your hand. And I'll try to see if I can detect your hand waving or raise your hand via the Zoom function. And I'd love to hear some, for 10 minutes, let's interact about this topic. And Roz, if you see a hand raise and I miss it, let me know. So one chat just came in. Is overall societal progress incompatible with societal emotional regression? Well, that's an interesting question. I wonder if the person who wrote that is thinking about, for example, the expansion in global wealth. Some people say that there's a severe problem with inequality in the wealth that's expanding in the globe. You could have wealth expanding possibly, but emotional regression. Maybe this is a person who will come on and debate me in a friendly debate sometime. I'd like to hear more about that person's thoughts. Interesting question. Because it's sort of, I think Bowen could see into so many things, and Murray Bowen thought we were in a societal regression and predicted that it would get worse over decades, and that there would be some kind of really pretty rough phase transition that would occur before society got better, just like it happens in families. And I'm just challenging that viewpoint. So the person chatted back to me, I'd like to talk, if not debate. Maybe this person and I need to have it. I welcome a chat. We could maybe email me and we could have a chat and see about this. And I'm using the term debate in a friendly way. Another chat has come in. Google search analysis reminds me of the idea people don't do what they say. In other words, look at what people do, not how they search. I think that's a good critique, an interesting critique. However, what I think is interesting about the researchers' approach to the Google search analysis is that most people, when they're doing Google searches, don't think they're being observed. So I think it was a rather ingenious way of trying to take a peek at what's going on inside people's minds when they don't think they're being observed. And the person wasn't, identifying individuals. So certainly not a perfect process. But how else would you do it? How would you do it? Would you look at actual number of people killed? Or again, I've got another comment coming in. How do we make the public how do we move the public conversation away from the focus on individual expressions of racism long enough to take ownership for the relationship system in which we are all participants? I like that one. Maybe blame and shame projection is a way of binding anxiety. That's a very interesting idea, because this idea that humans are just driven to bind their anxiety, put it in a package where they're not experiencing it so acutely, and blaming and shaming, two versions of that might be active. Okay, Sydney Reed. Roz, would you help me unmute Sydney Reed? My colleague Sydney Reed, one of the founders of the Center for Family Consultation, a Chicago-based think tank.
Possible I'm unmuted.
You are unmuted, Sydney.
I
Yeah.
hear you now.
Okay. Yeah. I was just going to share that I'm a part of a book group that's reading Ibram Kendi, and the title is How to Be an Anti-Racist. His terminology is a little different than yours, Eric, but the thing that I was struck by of this, the scientific stuff you put out there about the brain, his conjecture is that there was always reaction to differences, gender, the insider or the outsider hierarchy, but the reaction to race didn't really come about until the 15th century when slavery started with the Portuguese. I don't have a way to verify that, but that doesn't take away from the reaction to the other, but he sees that classification as race that happened with the Portuguese as a justification to the self-serving economic policies that had been started by the Portuguese in the 15th century. So I'm just putting that one in. I'd be interested to see if there's more information on that.
Walter,
I recommend the book.
Sydney Walters, what's the book's title again?
How to Be an Anti-Racist, which is not your definition of anti-racist. It's more somebody who
person might like that term.
Person who sees the policies. The person who sees the policies behind the actual. So
how has the book impacted your thinking about how you want to relate to the topic at all? Or well, I'm just curious.
Yeah. Actually, 4 of us in our faculty have just started a little study group that we're trying to talk to each other about racism from a Bowen point of view. Stephanie Ferreira just posted on our website, Center for Family Consultation, a wonderful blog about violence and the police and whatnot. So we use that as a jumping off place to talk about her thing, and then each of us is trying to write a blog to talk to each other about, and you know, at some point maybe, I don't know where it's going to go, but just to try to get ourselves more educated and give ourselves the opportunity to think. Probably many of us are on this webcast, so and then the book group, and we're reading, you know, I'm reading, and then we're sharing reading. So we sort of jumped in it to try to get more educated and become more self-aware of our own white privilege behavior. And yeah, it's been a journey. It's been good. We don't, you know, the faculty doesn't all agree, which is good. So there's debate. So.
Well, Sydney, you've got many, many years in the saddle of trying to help people think about change and how to solve complex problems in families, strengthening the group while driving change. And I think it's, I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys come up with there in Chicago in terms of doing some good thinking about using those same tools to hit this topic. I'm going to read a few more of these chats that come in. Someone asked, what about the role of explosions of anxiety, especially from those who are objects of projection, in providing the energy, the impetus to change the way the system functions? Something I've thought about too, and I don't have any really good answers to that, but I think it's a question worth sharing. Would you liken this to highly symptomatic behavior from a family's identified patient? Yeah, that's interesting question. I would guess that among protesters, there's a real range in maturity, and that at the higher end, people are very thoughtful and purposeful about what they're doing, and that they've got a way of thinking about how to drive change. And then, of course, you have the other end of the spectrum, just like you do in any group. Okay, so I am going to go back to sharing now. And I want to tell you a little bit more about the thinking or the writing of Dr. Steven Pinker. So one thing when I gotta go back. When I talk about Steven Pinker, I regularly encounter a sort of different classic responses. And one is that, well, if you're saying that things are getting better, then you're really ignoring the suffering that's all around us. And another one is people assume that Steven Pinker is like a journalist who's writing his ideas. And I think one thing I want to assert is that if you read these books that I've put up here, especially, he goes into a lot of detail in the first one, The Better Angels of Our Nature, about how he comes to the conclusions that he's presenting, which I'll share a couple of them with you now in a moment. Again, the book is The Better Angels of Our Nature, Why Violence Has Declined. And I think what you'll find if you go and read how he comes to his conclusions, that this is a person who's extraordinarily data-driven. Steven Pinker, Harvard famous linguist, who also has got a big interest in the scientific study of history. He's really big on the Enlightenment and reason and coming to conclusions via data. Probably one of the most data-driven popular writers, popular scientific writers that I know about. And the quote I'm going to share now is from an article I found during my Googling that came from the New York Academy of Sciences, which is an amazing resource for articles on the topic of racism. We are a species distinguished by our extraordinary capacity for creative cooperation. Our simultaneously extreme biological diversity and homogeneity, and our ability to imagine possibilities and make them material reality. So these, the books are full of these kinds of charts, some diagrams or graphs. So I'm going to just walk you through what this one is saying. Global poverty is declining in a massive way, is the point of this diagram that comes from Pinker's book. So what you see there is three lumps. The smallest one is the 1800 lump. The next lump is 1975. And then the last lump, the one that bulges up to the upper right, is 2015. And then the line coming down, labeled extreme poverty, coming down vertically. So that's the line, according to this data, that Pinker gathers from the people he thinks are the most credible scientists on these topics, that shows you the percentage of the global population at that time that was living in extreme poverty. So you can see 1800, a very large lump to the left of extreme poverty, meaning in extreme poverty. In 1975, still a very, very big lump, but what a difference from 1800. And what I think many, many people are unaware of, and that there's a lot of consensus on this, look at 2015. The bulk of the lump has shifted to the right of extreme poverty. People are coming out of extreme poverty all over the globe. I'm going to flash through this slide. I'm not going to share a lot of it. You can find this online, Pinker's 6 Trends Toward Global Peace. These 6 processes, which he thinks were developing, there's a lot of data to show very powerfully in the 20th century: the pacification process, the civilizing process, the humanitarian revolution, the long peace, the new peace, and the rights revolutions, including a growing revulsion against aggression on smaller scales, including violence against ethnic minorities, women, children, homosexuals, and animals. And then the great crime decline. So this one shows in 1970, the 1970 level is to the far left, 100%. That's per capita levels of crime. So the 1970 level is to the left, and then you see the decline through the 80s, 90s, and continuing on now in rape and homicide per capita levels of crime. This great crime decline is really nicely summarized in a New Yorker article that came out in 2018, which you have a reference for here, by Adam Gopnik, who summarizes the research of a bunch of people on this phenomenon of the great crime decline. And I am absolutely amazed at how few of us really know that this has even happened. And a quote from that: poor and vulnerable communities have benefited most from the drop in crime. So I'm coming to the end of our time, and I'm going to let people go as I promised. I feel like it'd be really great to have another hour to talk about this with people. But it's hard to do that in these Zoom meetings. What's the point? I think the point is that these are factual presentations of what's actually going on. The point isn't that we're perfect. The point isn't that we need to stop protesting injustice. Those aren't the points I'm making. I think it's very important to understand that things are getting better because it inspires people to positive change more rapidly. And at the same time, maybe we can continue to talk about what needs to be fixed in an increasingly civil and productive manner. Next week, the same time, same place, we're going to have my colleague, Dr. Fred Travis, who's a wonderful man, and I'm going to interview him on neuroscience and prejudice. Dr. Travis is a very distinguished and highly published neuroscientist, and he told me he's got something to say about this topic. I hope you'll join us. You can see the other things that are coming up here on our website. These are all on our YouTube channel. And I just want to mention again on donations, we have received some very encouraging donations from people who've appreciated these programs. And if you're appreciating them and you feel moved to do so, it's easy to donate to our organization. We run it very lean. It's not going to sneak into somebody's pocket. And help us continue to produce these kinds of offerings on our website, which btvt.org, or just Google Vermont Center for Family Studies, and you can find our donate page there. And I'll end with Walter's quote, the same one I ended with last time. Where you are is a perfect place to work at the basic emotional processes in human violence. One just has to see all of the violence in humans that has been normalized. It's all around you. Have a good afternoon, folks.